Hi, everyone. Well, I'm waiting for the next panelist to come up. Another round of thanks to eColor. This is a tough act to follow, but we're going to see what we can do. So we're going to spend a little bit of time now shifting gears, moving into a segue session to think as we shift from a morning focused on sort of setting the stage, where we are, a little bit more to the application of shared value. And we're going to be moving into labs in the afternoon, focused on 4 key social issues. So we thought that we would spend a little bit of time talking to some friends, who I'll introduce in just a moment, about how they are working on tackling important social issues. The role that both companies and even large international nonprofits are playing in this space. As we live into and shift at the Shared Value Initiative a little bit from awareness raising on shared value to thinking a lot more about practice, how-to application, as we receive less questions and inquiries about what is shared value, but more how does it apply to my industry sector? How is it relevant in my geography? We're going to think about application and social issues. But first, a quick introduction, some of my panelists. To my right, we have Matt Lonner, who is the Social Performance Manager at Chevron, fellow Bay Area denizen. Paul Dudley Hart from Mercy Corps, the Senior Vice President for Global Partnerships and Alliances. And also, at the end, Rani Deshpande from Save the Children, who is the Director of the Youth Save Initiative. So first, just a little bit of context. I want to talk just a bit about the working group that we mentioned. The panelists that we have here are special for a few reasons. One, all are members of the Shared Value Initiative. And secondly, all are involved in some way in a working group that we developed last year at a summit table over lunch on the back of a napkin, thinking about what could we do with a group of large international nonprofits who were thinking about deepening their partnership with companies on important social issues. Fast forward to 2015, and we have a working group called the INGO Shared Value Working Group with 16 of the largest INGOs in the world who were working together to think about how they can move their partnerships and relationships with companies from transactional to much more strategic. And we're going to be gathering in 2 weeks' time 100 of these organizations, or 100 members from these organizations and their field staff in Istanbul for a 2.5-day agenda that's really going to dive into how we can deepen partnerships with companies, how we can think about companies more as business partners. So with that, Matt, I'm going to start with you. We've talked a lot about your approach to working with INGO partners. Chevron has supported the INGO working group. Why is it important to you, Matt?
Well, first of all, let me clear up a misconception. Membership in the INGO working group does not require you to wear a pink shirt with no tie. So it's just what we're doing. So we're not a cult.
It's a trend.
It's just a trend. It's not a cult. It's a difference. Let me talk about Chevron for a moment to set a bit of a context. So we're a vertically integrated oil company with operations all over the world. We're involved in the exploration, production, refining and marketing of gas and oil. And we have a very dynamic and challenging business. It has tremendous geological and technical challenge. We call that the below ground risk. And we have a fair amount of above ground risk, the social and environmental risk. We operate in countries, over 30 countries around the world, many of whom with folks around our fence line that live in extreme poverty, conflict and post-conflict environments, challenges around basic needs, health, education, economic development is a challenge. There are expectations, and this really gets to the question that you're asking. There are great expectations from our stakeholders for social performance across a myriad of activities. These are as a result of tensions among groups and stakeholders within countries, tensions among our fence line communities and stakeholders broadly. And these challenges affect our license or social license to operate. And it's a term that's been used a lot, but for our company and our business to be successful, we need to operate, or at least operate best in a stable operating environment. We need access to a healthy and well-trained workforce. And we need to be able to differentiate ourselves among our competitors as a partner of choice. Core to our company are our values, and every company's got a set of values, but among our principles is the notion of partnership. It's integral to everything that we do as a company. And so the question is, how do we use partners to benefit the business and benefit the communities? Our commitment to our communities is only as strong as the partnerships that we build along the way. And we have a lot of great and healthy partnerships to help us implement our social investment program. We invest about $250 to $300 million a year in communities around the world. But where the opportunity lies is not so much in finding implementing partners, because there are great implementing partners and they're fairly easy to find, two whom are sitting on the stage right next to me. So I don't need to go that far. But the challenge is, how do we go one step farther? When we think about shared value, we think about how do we unlock the $40 billion we invest in goods and services around the world, the work that is embedded within our business that we can harness potentially to address greater systemic needs around workforce development, which meets local content regulations, to meet stakeholder expectations, and to manage conflict in a way that allows our business to operate unabated. And to do that, we need partners, and different than implementing partners. We need partners that have technical expertise, whether it's in the needs assessment phase or all the way through to the monitoring and evaluation stage. We need partners that have convening power, that can bring other co-funders together so that we can leverage resources and other expertise. And so there are a myriad of dimensions that we need strong partnerships. And one thing I've observed over the last 10 years is that the NGO community, as mission-driven as it is, and as effective as most NGOs aren't always in tune with the needs of business. And so if there are two pieces to the shared value puzzle, one is how can businesses work in a way that aids society, and the other piece is how can our partners work in a way that supports the business. It's incumbent upon the NGO community to understand what makes business tick. And we were talking to the INGO working group not long ago, and the point I made, and I'll make it here, is usually, and you can all nod in disagreement if this does not resonate with you, but typically when an NGO is looking to partner with a company, the first place it goes, it looks at its corporate responsibility report, and it wants to know the ins and outs of how it invests in communities. But rarely does it look at the annual report to understand what makes the business tick, where they operate, what its drivers are, what its challenges are from an operational standpoint. Is that about right? So I see some nodding heads. And so I think that our investment in the INGO working group, I have trouble saying that quickly, INGO working group.
It's a tough one, yeah.
It's not a great acronym. The challenge, the opportunity for us, and the reason we're investing in the working group is to help build capacity, particularly of leaders in the field who are working with our business units around the world to help them understand how to bring value to the work that we do in a mutually reinforcing way.
Thanks, Matt. So Paul, this is a great segue to you as one of the original members of the Shared Value Initiative Leadership Council. Mercy Corps has been with us since the beginning. And also thinking just a little bit about Mark's comments earlier today about bringing collective impact and that approach into partnerships. I'm curious from your perspective, what are the key ingredients of effective shared value partnerships?
Well, I think first of all, I should say that about 5 years ago, we approached FSG to come and sort of shake us up a little bit, because we felt that the sort of fundamental NGO business model was not going to allow us to be relevant about 10 years from now. And I mean, what other industry describes itself by what it's not? I mean, we're a pretty odd industry to start with, and hard to define. And I think one of the reasons that we're doing that is that we have a sort of, most of us, and I think there are some who are, I think, more evolved, but, and certainly than us in Mercy Corps, most of us have a monogamous business model. You know, we're just waiting for the next request for applications to come out of USAID or, you know, sort of DFID or something like that. And that's really not going to be the solution. As we, you know, sort of think more and more about resilience, we're thinking in time frames, and we're thinking in processes, system processes that defy the sort of the government agency business model. It's got to be blended, and we've sort of got to bring commerce and sort of compassion together in a different type of molecule. So we've sort of gone down that road. We confuse ourselves. We stumble occasionally, but we're learning hugely from Chevron in 5 different countries. And a lot of our other partners are here today. But what are the ingredients? First of all, to underline what Elizabeth said this morning, patience. We have really got to learn our partners' business models, not their CSR strategy, just as Matt said. You know, if we're going to mitigate risk or add value, we really need to understand what those 2 factors are. Right now, we are building a water utility in the DRC, the Democratic Republic of Congo, by ourselves because nobody else would do it. There wasn't a commercial contractor who would come in and do it. So we failed. We didn't reduce the risk there. So, you know, first of all, having that patience to get past your points of harmony and get to your points of dissonance, which is really the stuff you've got to work on. Then the second thing is you need a new business model. You've got to firewall your investment in this area from the next 50 million RFP that is coming down the road. And I think the last thing, well, there are many things, but the next big thing for me is sort of get over yourselves. You know, we all sort of think we're a train, and we want to think that we're a train, but we're really a boxcar. You know, we're as good as who we're connected to. None of us have the solution. And we've got to figure out what that is. As another example, in Nigeria, we're working in a program to bring young women into small businesses. And that sort of started with a conversation and a relationship, as it always does. It was kicked off by Coke's 5x20 program. And then Nike Foundation came in with the Girl Effect knowledge base and their partner, the Girl Hub in Nigeria. Then DFID came in with $17 million to prime the pump. And then, interestingly, MasterCard came in after that, who helped us or are helping us create a national ID program with the card technology that would allow those girls access to capital. So there you've got a tremendous, you know, that's a train. And as a result of that, 18,000 people, 18,000 young women hopefully end up with jobs. And I think the other thing is what Hikmet said this morning. Really have a maniacal focus on your customer or beneficiary. And shared value works when it's sort of somebody with an inspiration and a headquarters matching somebody who has an aspiration really close to the ground. It works when they meet. It's a nightmare when they don't.
Thanks, Paul. I love this sort of inspiration from the top and aspiration from the ground. So, Rani, I'm going to turn to you now. Paul mentioned access to capital and also MasterCard Foundation, and that was a part of our conversation, getting to know each other around Youth Save. I'm curious to hear a little bit from you about the program, and we also talked about systems change. Found out Rani was a former Bridgespan consultant over lunch today, so curious to hear what you have to say.
Sure, thank you. First of all, thanks for the opportunity to be here, and I just want to
Absolutely.
build on so much of what my colleagues have said here, especially in terms of the last point about going past the areas of convergence and exploring the areas of dissonance. That's something that really resonated for me. For the last several years, I have directed a project with about 14 different partners to develop and test teen savings accounts in a global sample of 4 countries, Colombia, Ghana, Kenya, and Nepal. And this has been something that would not have been possible without a very multifaceted partnership. We have 5 partners in North America, including researchers, ourselves, Save the Children, and 4 local banks, 1 in each of the implementation countries. And it's been a really fascinating process to have journeyed with those financial institution partners for the last 3, 4, 5 years, because the goal of what we were trying to do is to sort of change institutional arrangements, change systems to help low-income people, teens in this case, overcome some of the short-termism with respect to savings that Elizabeth very rightly pointed out that many people face this morning. So the overall goal was something we all agreed with, but how we were going to get there and the actual contours of the shared value, if you think of shared value as an overlap of interests, how that area of overlap grows and shrinks over time as you get to your goal, I think is something that we're not very experienced in having a really frank and authentic conversation about. And that's why I'm so happy that there are forums like the INGO Working Group, which has been and will hopefully continue to be one of those rare arenas to have an authentic conversation about how those interests grow and change over time, but assuming enough trust between the partners. In this case, for example, everyone's eyes were focused on the prize of creating a system in perpetuity that would afford the opportunity to provide these goods and services, in this case, savings accounts, to these low-income young people on a sustainable basis. And that is not Save the Children's role. It should not be Save the Children's role. It is something that we can only do in partnership with organizations whose mandate it is to provide those goods and services. And so as a result of a co-design and co-development and co-funding process, we now have 120,000 kids in accounts in these 4 countries. They've saved up over $1 million in nominal terms, which I know is very small, but in purchasing power parity adjusted terms, it's about 3 times that. And if you consider that almost half of them live under $2.50 a day, in individual terms, those amounts are quite significant. And then, of course, for the banks, they have, I have to say that we have very self-selected partners who have overcome another kind of short-termism that was referred to this morning. And the value for them is that many of them are in markets where 80% of the population doesn't have access to basic banking services, but the top 20% is often overbanked. And at the same time, many of their customer bases were aging. So the source of value for them is obviously creating the next generation of customers. And so I think what we've managed to do together is, as Michael Porter was saying this morning, expand the pie. But that would not have been possible without these intensely learning conversations, I think, about what is important to business and where our interests lie as well and how those interests converge.
Great, thanks, Rani. So just maybe going in reverse order now, I want to move into a little bit of a question on barriers to building shared value partnerships, forging these types of relationships with companies, with governments, with other partners that we heard a little bit about this morning as well. Rani, what were some of the key barriers that you found in sort of designing, prototyping, and building out Youth Save?
I think maybe one of them comes back to the discussion of new needs that was touched on this morning. And we've found kind of a human-centered design approach to be so helpful for this. And we see that as part of our role to really be in very close touch with the communities that we work with what are the needs, what are the latent emerging needs that, because of the frontiers of technology, there's a market failure around. And the private sector has not found a way yet to resolve in a sustainable manner. We can, hopefully, due to our knowledge of the communities, we can surface those needs and then we can broker those partnerships with private sector organizations that could be capable if the supply and the demand were brought together. But finding that point of intersection and brokering those robust, healthy partnerships is, obviously more difficult than it sounds. And so in terms of, a barrier, I would say some of this brokering role, maybe which civil society organizations could play, but are not fully occupying that space, is one challenge that I see out there.
Fantastic. We've heard a lot about the sort of brokerage and agency and some of the bottlenecks there. Paul, in your experience, building out a number of different partnerships, shared value and beyond, what's your wisdom here in terms of key barriers that we should really be thinking about getting sectors together to collaborate more, which is sort of what we're going to be spending a lot of time talking about this afternoon?
Every solution, particularly in this sort of new normal where, conflict is no longer bilateral, but it's disaggregated, and there are huge markets that are in turmoil and will remain in turmoil for a long time. So we've got to figure out how to do things differently. And there are natural resources in areas that are also in that condition. So, I think a lesson that we all need to bear in mind is that mediocre government is better than circumventing government. And there's always going to be a need for a molecule of state, the private sector, and NGOs. And the different elements can be different sizes and should be for different places. But there always has to be that functionality, and it's so easy to sort of go around government, but you will only get a short-term solution.
Fantastic. Matt, from a corporate perspective, what have been some of the main frustrations that you've worked through over the years with your NGO and other partners?
Frustrations. Well, it sounds like I'm having a therapy session in front of 200 of my closest friends. Well, I guess I'd focus on a couple of things.
Yeah.
One, if you accept the premise that the value to a business in adopting a shared value approach is improvements to affordability, efficiency, effectiveness. When I think about, particularly around the area around efficiency, the challenge and difficulty around both cross-business and cross-sectorial collaboration, I think continues to be a challenge. And Paul and I have talked about this before. A lot of NGOs with similar missions, and if they were businesses, they would find ways of merging or acquiring one another to build greater effectiveness. So the inability of, I think, a lot of NGOs to partner with one another, understandable as it may be, given that, again, they're all built around a core set of values and mission of their own. But I think that continues to be an area where you find inefficiency. Mm-hmm. I think similarly, the difficulty among the private sector to find ways to partner. Inherently, you've got challenges around values, mission, and strategies, and trying to align those around a common purpose, I think, is inherently difficult. And then the second point I would make is the point that I made earlier, is I think the same challenges that we in the private sector have, often learning to speak the language of the government sector or the private or the public sector, civil society and the NGO community, it's reciprocal. And I think it's incumbent upon the NGO community to truly understand the business challenges and opportunities that its prospective partners are facing, so it can align around a common set of principles and a common mission. Just because we're not mission driven, we're stakeholder and shareholder driven, doesn't mean that there aren't, again, mutually reinforcing interests that can align our activities.
That's fantastic. I mean, this is a great sort of point that you make, and one of the things that we're doing with the working group that we're talking about here, that's going to be coming together soon for a 2.5-day working session, is sort of bringing in both corporate and donor and multilateral development bank perspective into that meeting, so that it's not just an echo chamber of nonprofits talking about partnering with the corporate sector, but we're actually getting a lot of real-time feedback from existing and would-be partners. So finally, as we sort of close out here, I'm curious to hear a little bit from each of you on some issues that you're passionate about, on some of the work that you're doing. As you know, we're leading into an afternoon session that's quite novel for the Shared Value Initiative. We're going to be, for the first time, hosting very interactive lab sessions on women, on global health, on youth employment, and also on climate-smart agriculture, food stability, food security, as we really think more about living into this inflection point. So I'm curious to hear, Rani, Paul, Matt, what are some of the issues that you'd like to quickly highlight that you're working on, that you're passionate about, that you're wrestling with, that your organizations are sort of moving into? Rani?
I'll just cite two quickly that are connected to this afternoon's discussions. One is around the whole youth employment issue. One of the challenges that we face there is tracking kids after they graduate from the programs. And I know this is a challenge shared by all NGOs or other partners working in that space. We have a partnership actually with Accenture, which is allowing us to not only expand work in this area, but to tackle that challenge by leveraging mobile and social media and technology to improve data collection, improve data analysis, feed that analysis back in real time for program improvement, and almost most importantly, help track the kids for a longer period of time at a lower cost. That we're hoping will help us make the impact analysis much more rigorous. And I know that the quantification of social outcomes and the problems underlying that is something that there's been a theme running throughout these discussions. That's one partnership I'm really excited about. I know our Accenture colleagues, I think, are somewhere in the room, as having potential to really address that challenge on that front.
Fantastic. Paul?
Measurement. Really coming up with social measures. We're just talking about this with a partner from PwC at lunchtime, to come up with social measures that correlate with business results. We can both come up with our different measures, but if they don't interrelate and interact and create a fuller picture, we're really not being accountable. And then I think the other thing is, I just want to echo something that Matt has said, is that in our field, our other big challenge is that there are too many of us. There are no incentives in our system to aggregate, and we need to.
Good advice.
And we'll be better partners that way.
And that's a tricky, challenging, perennial issue that we might address as a working group or talk about. Matt, final thoughts?
Well, I can't overstate how much I agree with both Rani and Paul's comments. I mean, spot on, 100%. I would add that the question you asked was something we're passionate about, and for a company of Chevron's scale, we have a lot of activity underway as we speak, and we have business units around the world who may not have been introduced to the term shared value, but are doing it nevertheless, and I just don't know about it. We've got workforce development programs within our refining operations in rural communities because we need access to a qualified workforce. That shared value, no one did it because of that reason. It was to solve a business problem, and it so happens to solve a social issue as well. In the Niger Delta, after years of failed social investment activities, we work on a program called the General Memorandum of Understanding, bringing all rival tribes and communities together to try to manage conflict. And so managing that conflict, it reduced disruption to our operation and built capacity of local communities to address conflict on their own. Again, we didn't do it because of the Shared Value Initiative. We did it because it made sense to solve a business problem. And so what I'm passionate about over the next 12 to 18 months is trying to capture everything that we're doing as a company, trying to identify what are best practices, and try to bring some of those to scale.
Fantastic. Well, listen, I hope that for all of you, this sort of sets up an afternoon for a deep dive into interactive sessions focused on, really tackling some of these intractable social issues that we all care about and for which we're certain there are shared value solutions. And we also can now add mergers and acquisitions to our list of things to talk about at our meeting in Istanbul. So thank you all. There are breakout sessions outside of this room. Decide which of the 4 sessions that you're going to attend. We'll have people to guide the way. And thank you, Rani, Paul, Matt, for joining us today. Thank you.